Well, good morning. Glad you joined us today. We're actually at the end of a series called Apply Generously. We've been looking at this idea that just because we think in our mind something doesn't make that big of a difference. And we talked a couple weeks ago about going to a health food store and buying a bunch of health food, bringing it home and putting it in your cupboard. You feel healthier at the moment, right? But are you healthier at the moment? No. You buy that diet book and even mark some of the pages, and you think, man, this is going to be great. And I just feel better already just thinking about what I could be. Or that treadmill that now sits in your garage or your spare bedroom and has become that towel rack. And the idea has simply been based on this concept from James chapter 1, when James wrote, do what God's teaching says. When you only listen and you do nothing, you're fooling yourselves. And I don't know about you, but there are so many times when I catch myself fooling myself. Because I believe, because I showed up today at church, it's all good. God's going to smile and say, Mike showed up today. That's good, I'm going to do something good for him this week just to pay him off for showing up. Or if I get a tear in my eye when we sing a song, or feel moved to raise my hands or to clap or whatever the response is that works for me, and I feel like I've accomplished something. But James' point is simply if it doesn't translate into real action, we're fooling ourselves. And one of the worst things we can do is to fool ourselves. Because we know we do it all the time, right? I mean, you look in the mirror and you say to yourself, man, I don't look that bad. When you know. Here was the big line that we caught up for the first couple of weeks. It's not what you do. It's what you do. It's not what you intend to do. And it's really what God's after in your life and in my life, is that we would begin to live out lives that bring honor to Him. We begin to live out lives that make a difference, that matter, that have some substance to them, some difference to them. Last week we looked at forgiveness, the idea of applying it generously. And today we're going to talk about trust. Because in my mind, it's one of the most important things that we can apply generously. And if we begin to do that, the change that will take place in our lives, and more importantly in the lives of the people around us, will show us that we're not fooling ourselves. That we become doers, not simply hearers. And so if you're a guest today, if you're not a religious type of person, you just showed up today, I'm glad you're here, but most of this is not directed at you, all right? You get sort of a pass on this, because everything we look at today is coming from the book of James, and James was both a follower of Jesus and actually was one of Jesus' brothers. And for him to become a follower, and he came later in life, not as early in life, that it tells you something about the impact that Jesus had. But James is writing to fellow Christians, people who have understood this concept here, that to have faith in Jesus means to trust and follow Jesus. To have faith in Jesus means to trust Him. But it also means to follow Him. It means to have a difference take place in your life. And so if you're not a religious type this morning, I'm glad you're here. If you're just here because it's summer and, the family's here, so you're here. Or, you're here because, hey, somebody said you're going to do something fun later today, but you got to come to church first. And so, hey, you're here. Again, I'm glad you're here. Maybe you'll learn something out of this, but I want you to know it's not really directed at you. It is directed at those of us who have said we have faith in Jesus. Those of us who say we trust in Jesus. Those of us who say we follow Jesus. So before we get into today, I'm going to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Father, you know how hard trust is for some of us. How for some it's contrary to how we're wired. For some of us, it's contrary to how we've experienced life. To trust you is a huge step. But to trust others, that's almost impossible for some of us. But I pray today that you would speak into our lives not only the value, but the importance of trust. Because without trust, we really are lost. So be with us this morning as we seek to hear you, as we seek to follow you, as we seek to respond to you in your name. Amen. We're going to go back over to the book of James where we saw that verse earlier. This is actually right at the start of his letter that he writes to these believers. And as he writes to them, he says something that matters. Even if you're not a religious person this morning, you know something that all of us recognize, and that is that you learn more out of life when life is tough than when it's smooth. But you wish you learned more out of life when it was smooth than when it was tough, right? Don't you wish you could learn a lot about life by sitting on your couch, watching ESPN, eating pizza, guys? House all to yourself, you know? But you know the greatest lessons that you've learned have come from those moments when life has been the toughest, because they revealed something to you. They've either revealed that your trust and your faith, and whether it's God or something else, is stronger than you thought, or that it's not so strong, not so sharp. And that's where James kind of captures this idea. Begin in verse 2. He says, listen, whenever trouble comes your way, let it be an opportunity for joy. Wasn't an amen in the group, right? Because we've heard this. I mean, if you've been a Christian, you've probably heard this passage and you've gone, that doesn't make sense. Why would I go, woohoo, trouble's hit me, you know? I go, and think other kind of things when trouble hits me, right? But James is talking about the reality that when you and I, when we go through trouble, we learn some stuff about ourselves that we could not learn without going through those things. And that ought to be a source of joy for us because we've discovered something. We've either discovered our faith isn't as strong as we thought, or we've discovered our faith is stronger than we thought. And I don't know about you, but the vast majority of time when trouble comes my way, not all the time, but the vast majority of time, it has a picture of a face of a person connected to it. Isn't that right? People seem to be the biggest trouble in our lives. So whenever you see trouble and you see that picture of that face of that person that you're thinking of trouble, whenever that person comes into your life, let it be an opportunity for joy. Because, James will say, for when your faith is tested, and that's a good thing, we think it's a bad thing, but it's a good thing, because how do you know if you have faith? I go to church, Mike, sing the songs, clap along, move to it, I feel good. But when your faith is tested, your endurance, your perseverance, your hang in there with itness gets a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you'll be strong in character and ready for anything. Wouldn't you like to be ready for anything? James says you can be. But to get there, you got to go through stuff that develops your faith, that tests your faith, that reveals your faith, that grows your faith so that it becomes stronger and that it can endure. And that's how you get there. And none of us likes that plan. Don't we wish Jesus could just say, zap, ta, bam, you have faith and it's this full faith and everything's set? Wouldn't we love that? But I've come over a lot of years of being a Christian now, I've come to the conclusion that the best things in my life are the worst things in my life because they reveal where my life is at. And I would rather discover today that my faith isn't as strong as I proclaimed it to be, than to go through life without any testing and get to a spot when it really is important and I go, oh no, what I thought was true for me isn't true for me because I'm not sure what to do in this case. Trust. One of the hardest things for some of us to do. See, I grew up in a policeman's home, and policemen by nature are, how do I say it? They're on the lookout at all times. We would go to a restaurant. My dad would always sit in the last booth in the corner where he could see the cash register, he could see who came in. It was just how he was trained because he was always observing, always watching Dave for somebody to do something wrong. Because you can't trust people. You know why you can't trust people? Do you know why you can't trust people? Because they do bad stuff, right? I mean, if you heard the news this week, another sad case here in America. And it's so easy to fall into that, it happens, and they're just bad, and all this stuff bad, and we begin to say, this group's bad, or that group's bad, or those people, whatever the case is. And trust is hard for us sometimes. It's hard for us with God, but more importantly, it's hard for us for other people. So there's two things that make it hard for us to trust. That is other people. Number one, what we perceive and who we are. Two things that make it hard for us to trust. What we perceive, what we observe. How many of you have ever been let down in your life by some other person? Feels great, doesn't it? Especially if it was a big deal. You were supposed to get married, and then you discovered they were doing this, and it's like, how can we now? Because you did that, you broke my trust. Person told you got the job lined up for you. Hey, get everything ready. You gave your 30-day notice and discover, well, everything quite didn't fall through right now, and maybe later. The things that we perceive, the things that we experience. And who we are. Because all of us have been affected by everything that's happened up till today. Some of you grew up in pretty crazy homes. And because early on you had those great experiences, quote unquote great experiences, they have colored how you look at other people. They have influenced what you think and how you can or can't trust in your life. You've had other experiences. You've had teachers who said to you, well, I didn't, even though you turned in the bar, you literally put it in a basket. They said, I never saw it, so you didn't get it. You didn't get it in. And you begin to say, well, how can I trust if they don't get what I put in? And those two things, what we perceive, what we experience, and who we are, make it hard for us to trust. And here's the point. In every relationship, there are unexplainable gaps between what we expect people to do and what they actually do. Right? There's this gap. There's this gap between the expectations and the experience. And the question for all of us is, what goes in the gap? And what goes in the gap has everything to do with what you perceive and who you are. So if I say I'm going to be home at 5, and I don't show up at 5, what do you think? What's he out goofing off? What's he doing? Oh, You're getting that project ready for work. But you didn't get all the stuff you needed. Between the expectation, I need this stuff to fill out the report, Kevin, right? But the experience, I didn't get it. What goes in the gap? See, what we put in the gap influences so much of our lives. And what we often put in the gap is from our perception, they let us down, and our back, all of our back history. This is just another line, another story, another experience. of somebody not coming through in the crunch? You know, whether it's in the home. How many times have I told that kid to clean up, you know? You know, your roommate, supposed to take the trash out on Tuesdays, didn't take the trash out this Tuesday. A lazy bum, what are they doing, right? You know, you have it at the office, you have it at home, you have it when you go out in your sports and recreation, all those kinds of things. We have it in our government, right? We have the expectations that our politicians will do what's best for America, right? That expectation is not as strong as it used to be. And then we have our experience. And isn't it amazing in our country that whether you're a Democrat or Republican or an independent or whatever other verbiage you want to put on it, you think 50% of the nation is idiots? Because of what goes in the gap, what we place in that spot. But here's the important point. We decide what goes in the gap. Now you're sitting there thinking, no, Mike, they decided. They were supposed to be home at 5. They didn't show up until 7:30. They decided what went in that gap. They failed, and so that's what goes in the gap. And you are absolutely wrong. Because how many times have you had a discussion and discovered that what you thought the reason they weren't home at the right time had an explanation to not being home at the right time? You ever had that wonderful joy? You know, you had it all made up in your mind of how they had messed up. And then they had a really good reason. Like they were in a car wreck. And they have the car to prove it, you know? And what do you do at that moment? Because after you've already filled in the gap with all your thoughts of they're out messing around, they don't care about me, they haven't showed up and done all these kinds of things, now you have all this adrenaline, now you have all this stuff running through your veins. Then what do you do? Can you let it go at that time? See, you have far more power in deciding to trust than you suspect. Because you get to put what goes in the gap. You get to decide, no, this is just happening again, and they're out doing this, they're out messing around, they're failing me again. They're not giving me the information to turn in for this report so that they look good in front of the boss, so I don't look good. Whatever the stuff that goes in there. But you have far more power, far more, in deciding to trust than you suspect. Because you have the power of choice. And we don't like that. I'd much rather feel that the reason I'm mad is because Lori messed up again. Because it's just another mess up. And every time she messes up, it gives me reason to put something in that gap. To where the point is, that's the go-to. She's messed up again, so that's just what's going to happen. And let me ask you a question. How many times is somebody being disappointed in you, reading you the riot act, telling you were wrong when you didn't get the stuff on time, when you failed to follow through as they thought you were, but you had a good excuse? How many times have they ever come down on you and said, no, I don't trust you because this is what happens all the time? How many times that made you turn around and say, oh, okay, I'm going to change my life and be trustworthy? So often when we don't trust somebody, and we get that in our mind, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because everything gets filtered through, I can't trust them. Why? Just can't. See, if you place trust in that gap, apply that generously. That when trouble comes, make it an opportunity for joy. When trouble comes, make it the choice that you're going to make to put trust in that thing. That you're going to say, maybe there's a good explanation. Because here, when you put trust in that gap, you give the other person the benefit of the doubt. And how many times would it have been great for you to have gotten the benefit of the doubt when somebody else felt like you let them down, when you had not let them down? And how much stuff would have been taken care of if they'd given somebody the benefit of the doubt. Trust in that gap looks for the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior. I didn't say this was easy, by the way. But think about the power of that. The power of looking for the most generous explanation for the other person's behavior. As opposed to right away saying, nope, they did it again. They let me down again. They failed me again. See, starting from a place of trust is one of the toughest yet most powerful choices you can make. Because it really is a choice. And it's starting at a place where when you have that gap between expectations and experience. They were going to be here at 5. They haven't shown up at 5. Said she was going to clean her room. It hasn't been cleaned yet. He said he was going to do this, and it hasn't happened yet. In that moment, we have the choice to give them the benefit of the doubt, the choice to believe the most possible, most obvious, or most generous explanation for it. And it's a powerful choice because when they get home, when they have a chance to talk about it, you may discover there was no reason to get upset in the first place. See, you have far more power in deciding how trust goes than you suspect. Now, I know some of you sitting there thinking, oh, no, Mike, you don't know my situation. I have proof. And I am glad to go to the file cabinet and pull out the proof. Some of you are in the blessed joy of having that kind of relationship. Every time a fight comes, it is a history lesson. And they go way back, right? And history comes, and it goes, and it goes, and it just... And we forget how much power that we hold in this thing. How the power of choice, the power of approach, the power of a decision can change so much. Because I don't know about you, but almost every day of my life, I have multiple opportunities to make this choice. And when I don't, it's easy to feel like I'm the only one that really cares. I'm the only one that's doing my job around here. I'm the only one who's really following through. But if I was honest and stepped back from that, I'd know that no, I don't always follow through when I say I'm going to do this because I just get all this other stuff and I have all my explanations. And how many times have I wanted that chance to give an explanation of why this didn't work out, and I didn't get the chance? See, you will never know who you can't trust until you trust them. And if you approach every relationship from the point, I can't trust you until you prove yourself to trust me, you will discover that you will turn trustworthy people into untrustworthy people. Because if I have to prove that you can trust me over every little thing, at some point I say, I don't give a hoot. Why should I try anymore? And the power of trust is incredible. I'm going to take you to a story as we wind up today. In my mind, that captures this idea of trust in the best possible way. This is a story about Jesus and his kind of picking out all these disciples, all these people that were following him, when he picks out 12 guys to be his closest followers. And it says there, these are the 12 he chose. A guy named Simon, who Jesus calls Peter. And if you know anything about Peter, Peter is this loudmouth, always getting in trouble, always putting his foot in his mouth kind of guy. He's the guy that you're always glad in the crowd because they're doing the stupid stuff, and it takes the attention off of you. There's James and John, who I love this. Jesus nicknamed them the sons of thunder, right? Which is one of two things. Either they're these guys that are, really kind of at the edge. I mean, they got their biker jackets on, sons of thunder brought back, And there's a couple of guys. Or these are two very wimpy little guys that are quiet and meek, and Jesus just kind of jokingly calls them sons of thunders because it's like, they don't even squeak. I don't know which one, because we don't get much picture other than this picture here. There's just very little bit about them. But this is the picture. You got this guy that's really loud. You got these other guys that are either really tough or not so tough. You got Andrew and Philip and Bartholomew and Matthew. Matthew's this tax collector. Nobody likes tax collectors. It's true 2,000 years ago. It's true. There's Thomas. There's James, son of Alphaeus. There's Thaddeus, who's actually called Judas in other places, but who wants to be called Judas, right? This is Simon the Zealot. We used to call them guerrillas. Now we call them terrorists. This is the person, he wanted to overthrow Rome. He was all for the Jewish nation. And Rome was controlling things. So he was part of this party that was always looking to overthrow, always looking for revolt. That's one of Jesus' followers. And, of course, Judas Iscariot, who betrays him. Why in the world, let me ask you this question, why in the world would Jesus pick those 12 guys? I'm convinced that Jesus picked those 12 because he chose to put trust in that gap between his expectations and his experience. Because Jesus knew that by starting in a place of trusting them, as opposed to a place where they had to earn his trust, was going to be the only way to give them room to grow, room to experience, room to be changed. See, being trustworthy is not the same as being perfect, flawless. And we got to get that out of mind, that trustworthy means 100% all the time, every time, and no questions, no explanations. And being trustworthy means being worthy of trust. And those 12 men were trustworthy because Jesus made them worthy of his trust. He gave them responsibilities that they could not do by themselves. He gave them opportunities, and oftentimes they did great, other times not so great. One time Jesus turns to Peter and says, "Get behind me, devil." Not the thing you really want to hear from Jesus, right? Did that change Jesus' trust of Peter? No, Jesus said, "Listen, I know what's kind of going on here, and I know you kind of wrapped up in this stuff, and just kind of catch yourself here, but let's get back on this path." See, you have far more power in deciding to trust than you suspect. And I want you to believe that as you leave here today. I want you to see the possibilities in your life. That if you may use that power to choose, and that you choose to always go to the trusting side, always go to the idea that maybe there's a better explanation than the one I've come up with, because the one I come up with doesn't look so good, but I'm going to believe that there's something else until I hear different, versus I'm going to believe this way until I hear different. So let me close with this couple of ideas. One, if you're a person who has a hard time trusting other people, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand because you wouldn't raise your hand because you wouldn't trust what I'm going to ask you to do, all right? But if you're a person who has a hard time trusting other people, and there may be some good reasons for that, I'm not questioning that. But to get to where I need you to go, I'm going to ask you to do something. I want you to do something this week, not do it here today, because I need you to say something out loud. I need you to look in the mirror and do something for me. And here's what I want you to do. I want you to get in front of a mirror. If you're kind of that person who has a hard time trusting other people, I want you to look in the mirror and say, "There is no place like home." No. I want you to look in the mirror and say, "I have a hard time trusting people." I want you to hear yourself say that. Because sometimes when we hear ourselves say something that we're thinking about, it helps us understand who we are and why we're that way. Now, if you're a person today Who other people have a hard time trusting? Again, I'm not going to raise your hand because we wouldn't believe you if you raised your hand. I want you to ask yourself this week, what can I do to help change that impression of mistrust that other people have of me? Because if you're in that category, if you're somebody that people have a hard time trusting, you know who you are. And if you know who you are, there's a reason you know who you are. And so you have to honestly ask yourself, what am I doing? What can I do differently? What am I failing to do? And how can I change that? Because trust is one of the most important yet toughest things you can give to somebody. Real trust. And that's why I think that I think that God asks us to apply it and apply it generously to life. That when we hear reports, we believe the best instead of believing the worst. When something doesn't quite match up with us, we expect a reasonable answer versus something that isn't. Because I want you to know something. Just as Jesus trusted those 12 guys who he had no reason to trust, he also trusts you. Not because you're trustworthy, because you're worthy of his trust. Because he believes that with him in your life, you can be a person who lives in a different way, a person who experiences things in a different way, a person who relates to other people in a different way. In a way, when those opportunities come to have trouble, and again, so often those are lined up with other people, that there really would be an opportunity for joy because there's a chance for your faith to grow, a chance for your trust to go, a chance for that experience to grow.